Good morning to everybody as you arrive for this morning's Insights event. We will start in a couple of minutes, just giving people time to join and get settled, and then I'll kick off. But a very good morning to everybody on this. Well, where I am, it's sunny. Hopefully, the same applies to everybody that's joining. We'll give it one more minute, everybody, and then we'll get started. There's still people coming in through the lobby that I can see. So bear with me, and then we will kick off in just 1 minute's time. Okay, let's get started. Hello, everybody. Good morning and a very warm, sunny welcome to today's Business in the Community event. This is our annual event as we launch our Times Top 50 Employers for Gender Equality Insights report. So that is now live and available on the website, and my colleague Emily will post, oh, she hasn't already, a link to the chat so that you can access and take a look at that when you have time. So we'll just look at the agenda for this morning, and the purpose of this morning's event is to highlight areas of strength and areas that require further action for gender equality. We are going to hear from some of our members who have participated this year and asking them to share practice, share insights, and to help incentivise action on gender equality. So I'm just going to take a moment to introduce those panellists. So thank you and hello to Anna Simoglu from Mott MacDonald. So she's an EDI manager at Mott MacDonald. Sal Karbipur, who is DEI project lead for National Grid, and Philippa O'Connor, who is the Chief People Officer at PwC UK. So we'll hear from them in a little while. Before that, I'm going to share some of the highlights from this year's report. And then after we've heard from the panel, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions. But meanwhile, you can flag your questions in the chat. We'll keep an eye on that. Before we get to that open floor question session, I'd ask everybody to stay on mute just so that everybody can hear clearly from our panel and presenters as we go through. So let's get started and have a look at some of the highlights from the report. We were delighted to see new entrants this year. We saw new sectors joining the process, including from the construction and tech sector. We also know that it's never been more important. At Business in the Community, we stand for responsible business as a foundation for UK growth. We know that there's huge economic value and potential to be unlocked if we get gender equality right. However, we're not there yet. There's still fewer than 10 female CEOs in the FTSE 100. The pay gap is still very real, particularly for certain women. And 58% of women report experiencing sexual harassment, bullying, or verbal abuse at work. So this insights report will help us look at what employers are doing to tackle those stark statistics. And as I said, we'll get to sharing some of the activities that our members are doing live in this session in a few moments. So if we move to the next slide, please. Brilliant. So in terms of the key themes that we've seen this year, overall performance has trended higher. We saw a 12% average increase in scores this year versus 2024. So people are moving closer towards the actions and impact that will drive that change and unlock that economic value and potential that we know is there. In terms of where we saw, I guess, our highest performing areas, so preventing sexual harassment and our questions on that topic, scores in that area have increased by a whopping 25% versus last year. That's moved from 9th position to 1st place. And we see that as being an immediate impact of the Worker Protection Act that came into effect last October. In terms of what's still faring the same and some of the highest performing areas, so since 2022, inclusive cultures, which is where we assess workplaces that encourage employees to speak out and challenge poor behaviour, has remained in one of those top scoring areas. Also, organisations are still seeing the benefit and still working through taking a strategic approach with objectives that are monitored, that are where accountability is clear and where there's dedicated strategies for championing gender equality at senior levels in organisations. So those are the two areas that continue to be among the highest performing. We saw a decrease in scores for our flexible work area of assessment, and they decreased by, on average, 5% since last year, and that moved down to 10th place. We saw less evidence of organisations embedding policies and practice across other organisational processes as well. So attraction, recruitment and performance review. In terms of what was consistent with last year in those lower scoring areas, so our assessment around how employers are supporting parents and carers has stayed kind of lower, and work to address social mobility for women has also remained in some of the lower performing areas. So we saw increases in the scores in real terms, but they're still hanging around in terms of the areas where there's more work to do and hopefully more opportunity to share for organisations what can be done to address destigmatising support for parents and carers and enhanced specific interventions that enable social mobility and gender equality in the workplace. We can move on to the next slide, please. So we evolve our areas of inquiry to the context. So we're always looking for what's happening that's reflective of the broader business and economic environment. And we saw this year that 90% of organisations that participated are considering the way that AI interacts with equality, diversity and inclusion agenda. That won't be a surprise. 63% of organisations have a senior sponsor or executive champion in place to support the adoption of flexible working. So that exists, but that's not following through in terms of impact to move that up. And we'll be looking at that in the panel discussion. About 40% of organisations are monitoring the progression for employees who work flexibly, and that's one of those things that hasn't shifted. And we ask organisations how they're monitoring it in terms of promotion rate, how long it takes time for flexible workers to get promoted, and the access that they have to development opportunities, and that hasn't shifted. We continue to see organisations, although only just a third, looking at activities data through the intersectional lens to understand what are the blockers around gender and ethnicity, for example, pay gaps, but also looking at gender and disability pay gaps, and encourage organisations to take an intersectional approach to that data analysis to understand what are the interventions that will help shift that. So in terms of what's moved, there's a slight increase in organisations that offer paid leave for working carers. A slight decrease in the number of organisations that publish their flexible working policies, and quite a stark decrease. You see 10% decrease from last year in organisations that are publishing their parental leave policies in full externally. And that's incredibly important from a transparency perspective, but also in terms of attraction, and for individuals that want or need a sound parental leave policy. We encourage transparency around that so that candidates can see what's going on at organisations. The other area that we saw a large decrease was around the number of organisations that are considering introducing equal or enhanced parental leave in the next 2 years. So that has decreased by 17% since last year. Right, so let's dig into that a little bit, and I invite our panellists to come on stage, as it were. We'll spotlight our panellists so you can all see who they are as they talk. We introduced them earlier, but what we'd like to get to in this panel discussion is to further and inspire organisational action on gender equality. We invite our panellists to share real-world examples of how they are addressing key areas. And we're going to focus on 3 key areas. One will be flexible work. The next will be around how these organisations are supporting working parents and carers. And then we're also going to look at some of the barriers to progression in particular at the moment. So my first question, and I'm going to ask everybody to reflect, and then we may follow up a little bit and probe deeper. So I've just shared that flexible working was one of the lowest performing categories amongst this year's Times Top 50 for Gender Equality Award, and scores dropped by 11% compared to 2024. Our applicant response indicates that while some initial or preliminary steps are being taken to enable flexible working and foster a supportive culture, there's less evidence of embedded and inclusive flexible working policies. And the culture that flows from that was widely scarce in applicants. So Anna, I'll start with you. Can you share any reflections on why you think flexible working was the lowest performing area since last year? What do you see as some of the barriers to organisations creating a culture that supports inclusive flexible work?
Thank you, and hi everyone who is on the call. I was initially surprised when you mentioned that this was the lowest scoring area, but when I came to think about it, I felt it did make quite a bit of sense. I think with flexible working, it may be relatively easy to have a policy on paper, but it's quite difficult to embed it in culture. And I think during the pandemic, we adapted quickly. We had to adapt really quickly, but possibly some of the older attitudes are creeping back, and some of the stereotypes about what it means to not be visible in the office. I think there is still quite a bit of stigma around this area. It's still a big thing that hasn't been addressed within many workplaces, really. if you're working part-time or you're working more from home, you're less committed, etc., etc., etc. So I feel there's quite a lot of work still to do to destigmatize. But I think especially now, I think people may be a little bit confused about what normal is now following that pandemic period. And I think that potentially is the reason why we've seen the figures decrease this year. We possibly are in a transition period right now, and maybe expectations are mixed. Maybe employers are confused, and there's a bit of uncertainty, which potentially makes it quite difficult to build trust and to embed flexibility as sort of a cultural norm as well. So possibly that is the key reason, the key barrier I feel may have led to that figure dropping, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. There may be that there's been a bit of overcorrection following the pandemic in terms of what employers are doing. And you're right, that confusion's there. You know, what's flexible, what's what's appropriate, what's people shirking, where does trust coming, and a really important aspect of enabling flexible work, enabling productive flexible work, is how line managers feel and the support and empowerment that line managers have to provide a flexible working environment, structure, job design, etc., etc. How does Mott MacDonald ensure that line managers are equipped to support flexible work?
Yeah, you say managers are key. And I think we are a large organization. We're a global large organization. And I think what is quite difficult to achieve is that element of consistency in the implementation of a range of different policies and practices, including, I would say, flexible working. So we do feel that we need to do as much as possible to equip our managers. This is a key priority for us. So for me, it's less about one-off training sessions on flexible work, and that doesn't hurt. That's great, but I think it's more about giving them the tools and building it into their broader development, essentially, rather than just as a one-off. So we do try to give manager tools to lead inclusive and hybrid teams, things like building trust, things like setting clear goals, supporting people even if you don't see them at their desk 9 to 5, for instance. So a lot of tips and playbooks on the how to do things, how to run successful mixed team meetings, how to manage performance by outcomes rather than focus on presenteeism. So this is a lot of the things we're trying to do, but also very importantly, we expect managers to have open conversations with the direct reports, with their teams, about what they may need, to check in one-to-one on a regular basis, to identify any flexibility requirements, to identify any adjustments that they may have. So I feel that these conversations are key, but also for our managers, to equip them to demonstrate key qualities that are important: empathy, openness, active listening. And the other thing we do try to do is we try to share some stories and experiences around this specific topic from our senior managers and leaders, because obviously this resonates with many people, and people feel that we do take these issues really seriously when we do that. So yeah, I feel just embedding in the broader development is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's embedding it into how you run the organization, but with clarity and parameters and continual dialogue between managers and employees. And you mentioned senior leaders, so I'm going to ask Sal to, we know that senior role modeling of flexible work and all aspects of inclusion and leadership is pivotal to where an organization goes on these topics. Can you share National Grid's approach on this, Sal?
Yeah, of course. Senior role modeling's absolutely key for us. So we have 16 ERGs, and one of the ERGs that we've got, employee resource groups, is the Balance ERG, which started as a working parents network, and now they champion flexibility, well-being, career development for all. And one of the most powerful tools that they've launched is the executive speaker series, and it's where our senior leaders, they share personal stories about how flexible working works for them. So they've brought it, they've made it real life. Some talk about balancing leadership with care and responsibilities, or using hybrid working as flexible hours. And then there's others who talk about how shift swapping or remote work help them grow their careers while, making flexibility feel real. So it's not just a policy, and it's something that we actually practice across our organisation, and you can see it at all levels of the organisation. And our balance ERG now covers 3 pillars: families, career development and personal growth, and well-being. And we work really closely with our other ERGs as well. So like our Women's in National Grid Forum, just to make sure flexibility supports carers and women across the business. It's all about making it visible, making it accessible and lived at every level. And back to Anna's point earlier about, you can have all the policies in the world, but actually having it embedded in practice is so much harder. For us, it's making sure that we've got that manager buy-in and we've got visible role modeling and ongoing support to make it feel like, flexibility does work for everyone. But also there's a part of you need to think about the sector you're in. And sometimes, for grid, for example, we have such operational roles, and at the forefront of our mind is to deliver for our customers at the end of the day. And how do you create an environment where people that are on the field, and they need to be on the field, how do we give that flexible support? And so we've introduced things like shift swapping or flexible rotas to enable that, and we see it across all levels of the organization, not just where it's convenient.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not a one size fits all. You have to look at the your business and how you deliver as an organization, and then come up with innovative solutions. And as you say, that piece around engaging with people to see what's going to work, because flexible working isn't just one size fits all in terms of organizations. It's not one size fits all in terms of individuals. So that continual engagement, but as you say, senior leader role modeling to lift it off paper into practice is fundamental. Philippa, so how have you seen flexible working shift? A different sector, different way of operating, a different way of servicing clients and customers. How have you seen that shift? Have you seen any new barriers creeping up? And then I want to ask about how you're monitoring flexible working. So how do you know that there's a shift, and how do you know whether your approach to flexible working is having that positive impact for colleagues, particularly in terms of career development?
Yeah, thanks, Harriet. And I've so much of what Anna and Sal have already said, I think I would build on in terms of answering that question. I mean, fundamentally, this is a really difficult thing to call for lots of organisations. And in that case, I think we're lucky because we have scale, which helps us to do it. But also that we have primarily, and this is one of the challenges you've just articulated, primarily we have office-based teams, although not in its entirety. I think if I just take a step back, and build a little bit on what Anna and Sal were talking about, so much of this comes to trust. And you can have the best policies in the world, but actually the role modelling that you need to have, the clarity on expectations on what flexible working means and why you want it. We're right back to kind of inclusion 101 about if you want the absolute best talent in your organisation, you need to have a series of policies that enable you to bring them in. And I think because flexible working through the pandemic and then beyond has become quite a complex topic, it's really important for the whole organisation. We're bringing ourselves back to the why of this is the right thing to do for our people, but it's also the right thing to do for our organisation.
Yeah.
The role modelling point, just while I have the floor, so I have a 1.5-year-old. And one of the things that is really important to me is to make sure that I speak to that in our organisation and some of the timing, etc. challenges that poses me personally, because I do think that voice that we have across our leadership is really, really key for our people to ensure that this is an authentic way that we all should be trying to operate, to ensure that we can be our best selves at home and at work and bring our whole selves to work in that context. But to come back to your question a little bit, the other thing on challenges, I think, is the technological innovation that we're seeing. And I think that's a challenge because the pace of that change is driving organisations to need to operate differently. And in that context, there's a risk that while you're managing that change of, how you deliver to your clients, what your clients expect in the context of all of that technology, you revert to what you know, which is having people in front of you in a regimented way till you can train them on the new thing they need to do. And I think there's a risk there that we've all got to try and mitigate, because if we do that, we miss out. We miss out on developing skills in our people in the right way in our more flexible organisations that support that diversity of need. But we also miss out on actually embedding some of these policies and different ways of working to our strategic advantage. And so being brave, I think, as some of that technological uncertainty hits us, is really, really important. Let me just go on to touch on your monitoring question. So this is a really, really important point for us. And it's really vital that where we offer flexibility in terms of formal flexibility, but all kinds of flexibility, actually, it doesn't impact on our outcomes in other areas. And I think, as you sort of articulate in the question, a big part of that is around how we monitor. And so I think there's a few things I'd call out in the way that we do that. The first is we have empowered flexibility across all of our people. And that enables all of our people to work a sort of preferred schedule as long as it's meeting the needs of their clients' teams and their personal commitments. And, we're all human in that context. And so that sort of sets a context and hopefully sets a kind of cultural tone in our organisation that means all of our employees have that mindset. And therefore, when they come across or are working with people who've got much more formalised flexible working arrangements, the mindset is that that is part of our machine and our engine, and culturally that we support that. But then, quite rightly, we do performance monitoring. So when we do all of our year-end reviewing, we provide specific performance review guidance to ensure that contributions from flexible workers are fairly assessed and in a really objective way that looks at outputs and sort of the points made earlier, not attendance at desk or any of those sort of things. Again, with our kind of leadership within the business and our career coaches and our relationship leaders, we train them in inclusive behaviours to ensure that they really value some of that difference and the way that we support flexible workers specifically in that context. And then when it comes to the actual performance decisions, we look hard to hold ourselves accountable to have proportionality in those decisions. We make sure that we're looking at that data to really unearth anywhere where we might have an unconscious bias that is driving an outcome we would not be comfortable with. Again, scale helps us here, but part of my responsibility is really monitoring and addressing kind of proportionality by gender, by ethnicity, by working pattern, and I think importantly by the invisible components of diversity to ensure that we look at that all in the round. And so I think those things help us. We all have things to learn on an ongoing basis, but to try and do this in the best way possible.
Yeah, really insightful. Thank you, Philippa. And I absolutely agree. There's a bit of a risk at the minute that as all organisations are navigating that technological change, and it is at pace and it requires reskilling, and you want to keep your people rather than lose them and have to recruit in. So all of that stuff while needing to deliver BAU as well. So you have to still be functioning as a business, as an organisation, as you navigate this change. There's a risk that we forget about all of the things that we've learnt in terms of looking at things through the lens of inclusion and inclusive outcomes and linking that to sustainable success as you navigate the change. So really important. And yeah, data will help you. And I just one quick follow-up question. So you do all of this reporting. Where does that, who sees that? Who cares in the organisation about what that reporting's telling you?
Yes, so great question. That is a business issue as well as being a people issue. So really importantly, we look at that data. So when we look at the outcomes of our performance reviews, to use an example, the leadership teams of our various business units look at that to hold themselves accountable. And then ultimately that feeds up to me and I take the board through it. This is part of our inclusion agenda, but holding ourselves accountable at both ends of the funnel. So we want to do all the right things as we go into thinking about how do we support our people in an inclusive environment. We also have employee groups for our parents and carers, for our women, for other things. But actually the rubber hits the road at the end. And so making making sure that the board are looking at that such that where we aren't where we'd aspire to be in some places, we really push ourselves to think about what more there is to do.
Good stuff, good stuff. So we're going to zoom in. So I talked about flexible working takes many forms and shapes, and I'd like to zoom into the work that we do to assess progress on how organisations are supporting one group who may be in need of flexible working, they might not. So working parents and carers. And Business in the Communities Who Cares research found that 44% of working adults have some kind of caring responsibility. So there's quite a lot of your employees that would probably benefit from and thrive on the support for them in that capacity. So I'm going to turn to each of you again, but I'd love to hear about the steps that have been taken in your organisation to ensure that care is a mainstream issue. You understand that it affects a big proportion of your organisation. So how do you make sure that it's not on the side? How do you take steps to remove the stigma faced by parents and carers, because that's still quite real, and ensure that that caring responsibility isn't a barrier to either employment or career progression? So Anna, let's go back to you.
Yeah.
What do you do at Mott?
Yeah, so I think first of all, obviously getting the basics right. So having enhanced family-friendly policies is really important. And as you rightly so said earlier on, communicating this effectively, both internally and externally. So that is key. That's the sort of, as I said, getting the basic right. We use a lot of storytelling, which I also mentioned earlier. Generally, we use storytelling quite a bit, but specifically in relation to this as well. So colleagues sharing their real experiences, and that essentially helps normalize caring responsibilities, I would say. And also that shows that career progression based on the stories that we are sharing is very much on the table, regardless of. We have a number of different networks, but one of our networks is our Sunshine Carers and Parents Network, and they provide a lot of support. They raise awareness of the challenges carers face, and we deliver a range of campaigns together with our Sunshine Parents and Carers Network as well. And again, we want to make sure that managers are also part of that support system. So we do offer a lot of sessions for our managers to support them in that journey. In fact, recently we offered sessions specifically to support managers, support people for coming back from extended periods of leave, whether that's maternity, adoption leave, or whatever else it may be. Because we feel that, you know, these one-to-one conversations are really, really important. And I did mention this earlier on as well. So yes, this is these are some of the key things that we are doing to highlight the issue within Mott MacDonald's and make people feel comfortable to not feel that they're stigmatized if they are carers or parents.
And how do you ensure that the experiences, the stories that you're lifting up are intersectional in their nature?
Yeah, I mean, no one experience is the same, and as you mentioned earlier, Sal, as well. No, there isn't just one size fits all in terms of what we need to be doing. You know, if you're a dad, it's potentially a completely different thing than if you're an LGBTQ plus parent or someone supporting a relative with disability. And there is that element around that mental health angle too, because the pressures can be significant. So we work quite collaboratively with our wellbeing teams as well in that respect. I think I need to give credit to our Sunshine Parents and Carers Network. They run a range of different campaigns and sessions specifically around this topic, and they offer sessions that show that element of intersectionality, whether that's featuring LGBTQ plus parents or parents with neurodivergent children, or carers who are dealing with terminal illness in the family, etc., etc. And I guess because these stories are quite personal stories as well, they do help people across the business sort of move beyond those stereotypes about what caring and parenting really means. And I guess from that intersectionality point of view, we do link up really closely with our other networks, race and culture, advancing accessibility, and more, to try to join up these perspectives, essentially. I'd probably also like to mention a campaign that we ran last year jointly with our wellbeing team, and that really did highlight diverse perspectives and overlapping experiences. That was the point of the campaign, essentially. And again, that helped hopefully remind people that, you know, no two caring journeys are exactly the same. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The caring responsibility, whether that's because you're a parent or otherwise, it doesn't just take time. It takes a lot of emotional input. You get a lot out of it sometimes, but it also it can be exhausting from my experience. And actually, I'm a parent, and as a working parent, my experience at work has been really affected by my line manager's understanding of what's going on at home as well as at work. So I'd like Sal, and then I'll come to you, Philippa. I'd love to hear about any initiatives that you've started. Some that, you know, if some of them haven't worked, it'd be useful to hear about them as well. That ensures that working parents and carers are supported through line manager led initiatives.
Sure. I think at Grid, there's a clear expectation that managers support the flexibility that people need. And that starts from day one. So day dot, you come in, our onboarding and recruitment material highlights the flexible working that's available, and it sets the tone. So back to Philippa's point around trust, and we really try and create that culture where people feel like it exists and it's normal and it's normalized, and our managers, you know, it's an expectation, not an exception. And that's what makes the difference. And we really try to give our managers guidance and resources to have that open conversation, and we encourage them to tailor the solutions as well. We've got amazing DEI business partners that sit in each of our businesses, and they're able to give advice when it comes to conversations like this where the manager doesn't really know where to go or who to go to or what to do. And really kind of working them through, you know, what does it mean to be inclusive in that space, and how does that make that difference? And we've seen a major shift in attitude and culture with having our DEI business partners sit in the businesses and give that advice when it's needed in this particular subject. And you know, whether it's flexible hours or hybrid working or support during peak caring periods, it's not a one size fits all, and we just make sure that our managers know that and know that they can rely on our DEI business partners, the policies that are in place. And back to Anna's point, you know, if you get the basics right with really good policies in place to make sure that, you know, you can actually practice and embed them in, it makes all the difference. And we're just trying to make sure that we listen as much as we can. And so one of the examples I can give is in the past month, we've done a series of listening sessions across all of our business led by our Chief People Officer. And actually, we've done them at times that work best for our employees rather than just, here's a session, if you can turn up to it. We've actually, you know, we've done a whole load of research and understand when is the best time to go and speak to our colleagues, and really try and understand, you know, what do we need to improve on. And I think listening is, you know, it's so cliche, but it's so underrated. And sometimes we assume we know what the business wants because we're DEI professionals, right? And we work in this space. But actually, you listen to a colleague go, well, this is my experience. And you go, oh, wow, well, maybe we need to shift focus a little bit or create a space where they feel included too. So one of our biggest things is really just trying to listen. And I just delivered Global Inclusion Week last week. It was National Inclusion Week in the UK, but because we operate in the US and the UK, we call it Global Inclusion Week. And we really try to create environments where people can give us feedback, and it's not just about creating events that they can join, but actually creating an environment where they feel like they can speak to us too. So all of our DEI business partners were actually out on the field all week, but they had one day particularly where they went out to have these conversations. So things like policies and flexible working or care, initiatives that we've got. Is it working for you? Do you need more? And that gets directly fed back to our team so we can continue reviewing.
Yeah, and that's another example of the importance of dialogue. And it's not kind of coming down from here. It's built on dialogue, and it evolves as you learn, and things change. And I remember there was once a time where when people became parents or took on caring responsibilities, there was the assumption that therefore they had to be line managed by someone who had those same responsibilities, and that shouldn't have to be true. Philippa, any reflections on what you've heard, or any examples of initiatives? And it'd be great to hear an example of an initiative that hasn't worked, just in case there's any people here that are pursuing a path that they might need to think twice about, or anything that has worked.
So let me have a go at both of those. I think on the hasn't worked. So it's not quite hasn't worked, but it certainly was a learning, and it does build very much on what Sal was just saying. So we introduced a more formalised hybrid policy, which we announced last September. And that was effectively that there was an expectation that our employees would be in the office 3 days a week, or with their clients, or co-locating, and therefore there was 2 days of flexibility. And actually that came from almost an ask of being clearer, having more clarity on the expectation point that I talked about earlier, because I think that helps us to build trust. And that we felt, as a very much skills-based learning organisation, we needed our people to be together some of the time to ensure we really were investing in that development and learning for all of our people on the ground. But and we announced it in September to come into effect 1st of January. And it was very clear quite quickly from our ERGs that caused quite a high degree of discomfort with some of our networks, and with our parent and carer network in particular. And we therefore did a whole load of listening in a September to January period to really get under the skin of what was that. Because our data told us that they were in the majority already in at least 3 days a week. And so what was it about this policy that created tension? And a lot of that really bubbled up to be the unplanned. And so if you were intending to be in the office Monday to Thursday, your childcare arrangements or your care arrangements enable you to do that. And then something happens that means you can't. So on Wednesday, your son is ill, you can't get backup care, which we do provide, but quickly enough, and you need to work from home. You'll only have worked from home 2 days that week. And in listening and through that whole process, what we effectively did was introduce a form which enables people to say, I intended to come to work this day, but I couldn't. So that they are still compliant in the way that we look at the policy. This is a policy where it's a rolling 3-month average we're asking people to be compliant with, so maximum flexibility. But actually, by giving that control back to our employees has definitely significantly helped, I think, overall, but with our parent and carer group, to really improve how that has landed with all of our groups. I think the other thing about that policy that I'd again build on your initial question, supporting that policy's implementation through our line managers. And so really recognising that when there's a need to reflect whether that works for an individual, whether in their personal circumstances there's an adjustment required, whether they're struggling for any reason, we've really empowered those conversations to be through our career coaches, our on the ground people that can therefore understand at a real personal level what is happening to our individuals in that context. And I think that's been really, really key. The final thing I'd say on this, again, reflecting on Harriet, what you said and a number of the answers that Anna gave, the intersectionality point of this is so important because we can double down on particular groups here. But I think the more that in the context of any policy you introduce, so I'm thinking about hybrid in this context, but there's anything, everybody shows up to work with this kind of enormous backpack of baggage of whatever they left behind them at home. And that can be a new grad in a flat share where they had a massive party and they're knackered because, through to, somebody who is much later in their career heading towards retirement, who's got really complex parent care responsibilities and everything in between. And I think that there is a danger we look to our own groups and think that's the most difficult. And, you know, as a mum of a young parent, you think I didn't sleep last night and therefore. And the more we can set a culture that we're all carrying our backpack in, the more we have an environment that is sympathetic to that, the more people will give their best in that environment. And the more, and this is really key, I think, with our career coaches, we want to have multi-year, multi-decade relationships with our employees. You know, when your son is sick for a week and you need to do something different, that should not be to any detriment of our relationship with you or your relationship with us. And then again, that's difficult, right? Because then we have people who, you said the shirking example at the beginning, you need to really look out for that or it undermines the culture. But the more that can be a central tenet of the way you set a culture within your organisation, the more successful you'll be.
Yeah, brilliant. And that's a really inspirational point to finish that area of inquiry. I'm a bit nervous to now move to barriers, but we're going to do a poll with the audience. We've still got 74 people with us, and Jenny, that's really, oh, Matilda, it's really small. I don't know if it is for everyone else. May just be that there's a lag. Anyway, there's a poll in the chat. That's the place to go. And everybody's going to feed in and share which of the following they believe presents the greatest barrier to gender equality here and now. As that comes through, what would you pick, Anna, as the greatest barrier?
Yeah, I'm not the best person to actually choose one thing. But for me, probably I would say the attitudinal one is the one that I'm a little bit more worried about, whether that's complacency or potentially backlash, and that would end up giving us an EDI role, but which obviously is not what we want. I'm not sure if people feel that haven't we already done enough, or we're a little bit tired focusing on this type of issues. And as I say, that does worry me because we have made quite a lot of progress. There was quite a significant focus in the past 10, 15 years on gender equality and more broadly equality and inclusion. And I feel that we may lose that momentum if we become a bit more complacent and fatigued about all this. And I'm looking at the wider climate, whether that's economic pressure, any potential global situations and crises, and I don't necessarily want to go into this right now, but even things like different types of controversies around what is considered woke or not, and I'm putting that in quotation marks. So there is a risk here. I feel that we may end up losing focus and basically reversing back and losing progress. And I think every other thing that is up here on the poll is also really, really important. And definitely they're on our radar as an organization. But I think if you have got the attitudinal piece right, and you've got a culture within the organization that focuses very much around inclusion, and if you've got a leadership team that is committed to the agenda, and if it's part of all your day-to-day work, then some of those other issues, which are significant and challenging issues, and a lot of you mentioned AI before as well, I think then this will be addressed more seriously. I think the right questions will be asked. But if you've got the attitudinal piece wrong, everything else is going to fall behind as well, which is why I would choose probably this over anything else at the moment.
Thanks, Anna. Philippa, do you agree?
Yeah, so I think I'm in the same place, perhaps for a slightly more human reason. Anna's far more eloquent in the technical reasons there. I think the reality of what has happened in kind of US politics that has driven some of this over the last 12 months has unfortunately heightened everyone's individual bias. So if you're in a minority group, it speaks to, is my organisation going to move away from this? Will I be less supported? If you're in a majority group, has this gone too far? And do I need to think about whether or not my organisation is now biased in the other way? And that's just human nature. That's the way we all look at our own circumstances in life and reflect on them. And I think the thing that's really driven for me is the need for us to have a voice again on issues we might think we've already explained. So pay gap's a great example of that, where we've been playing this game for a long time. We've all been disclosing our data for a long time. We do that across a multiple set of characteristics. And you think, well, everybody understands this now. And you can't become complacent about any of that. Equally, that inclusion is important to us. So it's one of our 4 people priorities. It's a central tenet of our people strategy. But there was definitely some noise in the organisation because we just hadn't been as front foot talking about it, of how we moved away from that. And is that a reaction too? And so for me, this is definitely a challenge because we're all human at the end of the day. And therefore, the need to be even more front foot and not assume anything becomes even more important in that context.
Yeah, and it's not just the politics in the US, it's what's happening here in across Europe as well.
That was sort of the first trigger, I think, but then what followed.
Yeah, indeed. Sal, what do you think?
I feel like we're in a vicious circle of agreement on this panel. And I'd just love to build on Anna and Philippa's points, really. I think for me, currently it is the attitudinal shifts and the rollback of DEI, and we're seeing a change in the external narrative where organizations are really much more cautious about the way that they talk openly about DEI and, changing the trigger words, changing the way that they call the roles and the way that they come across as culture and engagement rather than actual DEI and inclusion and all of that stuff. And I feel like when those conversations stop, progress really stalls. And even internally as a DEI professional, I sometimes get the sense that people are really unsure of what they can say. And that risks silencing really important voices. Like Philip said, if you're a part of a minority group, you kind of feel hesitant to go, is my organization going to continue supporting me? And that might, cause hesitation to actually talk and speak up about these things. And at Grid, we've really tried to make sure we stay firm in our commitment. We operate both in the US and the UK, and there's some major shifts politically in them areas, and just to make sure that we're legally compliant to start off with, as we're a business. But that doesn't mean we have to stop talking about and having them conversations and things that really matter. On a human level, we've all got things that we need to talk about, and bringing that to work can sometimes be difficult as it is, and then bring this political lens and it becomes even more difficult. But if you don't talk about gender equality and inclusion, you can't address it. So we've kept the dialogue going, through Global Inclusion Week, listening sessions with our Chief People Officer. We had, over the past month, 500 people across the organisation, especially the ones that, in any organisation, you're going to have a mixed view of DEI. Not everyone, not 100%. I'd be out of a job then. Not 100% of our organisation is going to be a part of that journey. And it's really about listening to them voices as well and understanding the barriers and the triggers, so to speak. We've got ongoing employee surveys and just making sure every voice is heard. But you have to have them conversations to understand the attitudinal shifts and where it's given people hesitation or where it's given them a voice, and trying to balance that out. So for me currently, all of them points are so important and play a part, right? But I definitely say the fourth option is the biggest one for me.
Yeah, and our audience agrees. So 50% of people so it's not just you three agreeing.
It's not just us.
resonate as well. So we have probably got, I only need about 30 seconds to a minute to wrap up at the end. So we've got 5 minutes in case anybody would like to ask any questions. I don't know if there's any in the chat, or if someone wants to pop their hand up or just go first. That would be wonderful.
Seems like we've answered all the questions.
Yeah, but indeed. Louisa, hi there.
Hiya. Yeah, thanks so much for the session. It's been really informative and insightful. So I work for a small infrastructure consultancy where a lot of our people are seconded out to client organisations. And one of the challenges we really have is that we want to offer flexible working for all of our employees, but it doesn't match with the requirements of our clients. So our clients will, for example, be saying that we need people in the office Tuesday through Thursday. And so, so I guess my question is, how do we ensure equitable, flexible working, and how maybe can we encourage our clients to have a more a flexible approach to working for everyone?
Philippa, that probably resonates with you.
Yeah, it really does. And I think on the client sort of handling piece, there's a huge bit here around purpose. And it's also true for our organisation in terms of our internal expectations and where different people are, which is what is the purpose with which they want your teams to be located for what outcome. And we've had some really good conversations with clients around, you know, where do we really get the benefit of collective collaboration in person or in our offices for things versus what we think can be done just as well remotely. And I think actually the whole, I'm going to say city, but I mean that in the broader sense of UK, businesses are learning about that at this point in time. And it's really interesting. There is a point here to the previous question about the interconnection of that with some of the AI stuff, which is, where do you deploy skills which can only be deployed in a human way, face to face, that makes a real difference, versus the things that can be done in a much more mechanistic or individual way or on screen way in terms of the way that you work. So that's definitely been a part of our dialogue. It's not easy though. I don't underestimate that you have to go into those conversations and learn as you go, and you know, these are your clients at the end of the day, and so do that in a way that is to their need. But I think it is a conversation that can be had.
Thank you. There's another question in the chat, which is asking, what business outcomes have you seen as a result in investing in gender equality? Sal, you nodded when you heard that question. Any reflections?
I can have a go. I think we've seen clear outcomes across our recruitment, our leadership, and our culture. So like our external female hires rose from 29% to nearly 34%. And female leadership representation increased over 33% across line manager to executive level. So, you know, that's not just progress on paper, it's actually a shift in who's shaping our decisions in the business. And you know, we've also appointed a female director and a dedicated DEI leader to drive this work forward. And you know, 5 new women have joined our leadership team in the past year alone, and that's major, isn't it? And I mean, it should be the norm, but it's not. and that's the difference that it makes. You actually see it rather than on paper. You feel it, you see them decisions, and they bring real life examples, like we talked about earlier, of how, you know, caring responsibilities or being a working parent, and sometimes statistically it falls more on women than it does on men, and you get to hear them real life stories of, like, you know, Philippa said that in her business she'll make sure that, you know, she shares that experience, and that's what it's about really. So it's definitely had a difference in our recruitment and culture and all sorts.
Wonderful, thank you. So we're going to move to close, and Ian, I will answer your question as we go through next step. So there's a poll in the chat. We'd love everybody to just add a note to that, but also take a moment to read our insights report. It's on the website. We will pop the link back into the chat as well. Stay informed, register your interest so that you can be kept in the loop, and you'll get notification when applications are open in mid-November. Any questions about the application process here and now? timestop50@bitc.org.uk. Of course, if you're a member of Business in the Community, please reach out to your relationship manager or inclusion advisor. If you're not a member of Business in the Community and haven't participated in the awards before, you know, we evidently, Business in the Community, believes that there's a really strong competitive advantage for organisations that are continuing to take progress and continuing to put their heads above the parapet against that backdrop of noise and shifting narrative. So we encourage all employers to participate in the awards and demonstrate that you see the long term, not just today, not just tomorrow, but the long term benefits of taking steps to make sure that people from any gender feel welcome, included, and have the opportunity to thrive and progress in your organisations. A huge thank you to our panelists. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we will see you all next year.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks for having us.